Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Carl Forehand. And we hadn't hit the record button until just a second ago, but I'm already excited about the conversation that we're going to have. We have Angie Kuiper here. Before I dive into her bio and we get a conversation going with her, is there anything you want to share?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm excited because we're recording these for September, but we're going to record a series, as many as we can, of ex-pastors' wives that are going through deconstruction or something similar, something. I'm really excited about that. And we just read a chapter from a book of a friend of ours that we're going to interview later, that is about the feminine and resurrecting the feminine and all of that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited. And like I always say, hopefully I won't be asking many of the questions and this will go better. But
nobody can see us. So if I keep scooting the chair over and Carl gets out of the screenshot, no offense, but it's maybe be a conversation between Angie and I
would be happy with that.
Two, ex-pastors' wives. And so this is kind of, I'm excited about it too, because this is something I mentioned to you just a couple days ago, and our mutual friend Sherry had put something on our Facebook page, and that's how we got connected with Angie. So to tell you a little bit about Angie, she was in ministry from ages 5 to 35. She was raised in the independent fundamental Baptist cult. She went to Bible college at Pensacola Christian College for a year. She was married at age 19 and has been married for 26 years. She and her husband moved to New York State to help start a church. They were assistant pastor and wife for 9 years and head pastor for 3 years. They have 4 kids. 3 are now young adults, and their youngest is a junior in high school. She homeschooled for 14 years. She is currently in college with a goal of becoming a therapist focusing on religious trauma. And she is also currently working as a special education assistant teacher in a moderately cognitive impairment middle school classroom. Your plate is so full, Angie. So thank you for taking the time to be with us here on the Desert Sanctuary podcast. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me. And yes, I tend to keep myself very busy.
Yes, I understand that.
So, Angie, we think stories are sacred. We count it a privilege that we've been able to hear over 320 something stories. A lot of them abuse survivors. Some of them ex-pastors and things like that. We're excited to hear from an ex-pastor's wife. A spouse of a pastor, formerly, however you want to categorize that. We're excited to hear from you. So we'd like you to tell us your story in whatever way, whatever depth, whatever length you want to do that. and we get to listen. And thank you for
Um, so, well, my ministry journey really starts when I was before I was born. So my mother actually went into labor with me during choir practice, and she was the piano player, the only piano player. So she didn't tell anybody till choir practice was over that she was in labor. Which kind of sets the stage for the rest of my growing up, the way I was raised, and what the priorities were, right? Ministry was top all the time, ministry first. Then, if there was time left, family is how it kind of worked out. So, my father, when I was born, was in the military, and he and my mother, they say they got saved for real in that time when they were in the military, but they were both raised religious. They're as young people, so they've had religious exposure, but then they got saved for real, air quotes. And that's where the fundamental Baptist influence came in. My father went to Bible college at Tennessee Temple in Chattanooga, and when he graduated from there, after being in the military, when he graduated from Tennessee Temple, we started deputation. So I was a missionary's kid, and that started about age 5. And from the very beginning, there's the constant, remember whose kid you are, be on your best behavior. The pressure on children in the missionary aspect of ministry is absolutely incredible, because you have to be 100% on all the time. Perfect behavior, and you have to perform at every church and all of this stuff. And it didn't take long for me personally to figure out my behavior directly affected love offerings, or whether a church took us on for support or whatever. So at like 6 and 7, I already had that weight of, if I don't, toe the mark, if I screw up, then I'm preventing my parents. And then you sit in churches where pastors are like, and you children, if you prevent your parents from being in the ministry because of your behavior or whatever, all these souls are going to go to hell because your parents weren't there to tell them about Christ. So, so very young, I had that weight of ministry, right? We were on deputation from 5 to about 8. I was about 8.5 when we went to the mission field. And so then it kind of shifted from being a missionary kid to being the pastor's kid. And instead of brand new people staring at you all the time and critiquing everything you did, you have the same people all the time seeing you. And we were missionaries to the military. So the church changed over, but we didn't, right? So every 2 years we had a new church, but we stayed in the same place. So there was a lot of change constantly, and new people, and during that same time period, I was sexually abused for 3 years, raped the average of once a week, by my sibling. So, and once I was to the age where I understood what it was that was happening, really got a grasp of what was going on, I knew it's that weight of ministry. If I say anything, the ministry's gone, right? Blown up. What's my dad going to do for a job? Because the only thing I never knew my dad did was being a pastor, right? I didn't know about all of his other abilities that he had, what's going to happen to the family? Where are we going to live? What are we? So as a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid, you've got the weight of presenting for the ministry, and then this weight of, I have this secret that if I say anything to anybody, my entire life is going to explode.
Yeah.
Mm.
When so when I say I was in ministry, when deputation, we had to sing at the churches and perform.
Mm-hmm.
When my dad was in ministry, I started working in the nursery and like teaching Sunday school classes, not as the only teacher, but teaching Sunday school classes. 11, 12 years old, I was teaching kindergarten age kids. I was watching babies in the nursery. I was cleaning the church every week.
Wow.
Right. So we were on the field. We had one furlough when my sibling's senior year of high school. We came back to our home church, went to the Christian school. He graduated, went off to college. We went back for about a year, I think. And then my mom became very, very ill because the islands that we were on, they were in the middle of the Atlantic and they belonged to Portugal. So there was very mild climate, right? And so very moist. And the black mold grew very rapidly around there. So if you weren't able to stay on top of it. So my mom became very ill because of that. And we ended up having to leave and come back to the States, where my dad at our home church helped to start a mission board that the pastor wanted to start. But then again, I saw the repercussions of leaving the ministry of sorts, because my dad changed from being a missionary to working for the mission board, but we were no longer on the field. So there was this undertone about, not being real missionaries and having left the whatever, right. Because, even though like you're supposed to take care of your family and your wife is sick, there was still that looking down on you because you didn't complete or whatever. The idea was. So I went to high school, because since we came back, I went to high school at our home church, and I graduated from high school there. And we went to all the typical, youth conferences, camps, winter retreats, and all of these things. And this teaching of the purity culture teaching, that is so pervasive. If you're not a virgin, then you're walking garbage. And as I knew I wasn't, right?
Right.
For 3 years.
Of no fault of your own, too.
Right. But they don't make that distinction.
Right.
There's no distinction between voluntary and involuntary activity.
That's
Abuse is never addressed. So for all of my high school career, I was constantly told at every one of those things that I was walking garbage. I was worthless. No godly man was going to want anything to do with me because I was, damaged goods.
Right.
But at the same time, I still had to present that ministry face, that ministry facade, that we're, the perfect family presentation. Yes, very much so. That perfect family presentation all the time, even though inside, I knew that I wasn't. And so I graduated from high school, and so I was suicidal quite a bit during my high school time. Contemplated running away many times, and honestly, the only thing that stopped me was the amount of shame it would bring to my parents, right? So my concern was, and my focus was never really on me, because you're never allowed to think about yourself, right? Jesus, others, you, Right. You consider yourself last, the ministry mantra. So even once, I remember one time reaching out to someone and being like, I wish I wasn't here. I wish I could die. I wish I could whatever. And they were like, you're just trying to get attention. You're being ungrateful. You have the perfect Christian family. How could you possibly be so ungrateful for what, for the family that God has provided for you, this perfect Christian family? And when they said that to me, I was like, oh, okay, nobody's going to believe me. Just keep your mouth shut and do what has to be done, because you have the perfect Christian family, at least to everybody else.
Right.
But the reality of my family was sexual abuse, emotional neglect, emotional abuse, absent father because he was always with the ministry, right? And a mother who was very emotionally immature, emotionally manipulative, that kind of stuff. The kids were taking care of her emotional needs because my father wasn't there.
Sure.
And nobody was taking care of us, right? So, so I went off to Pensacola with the idea that I was going to study nursing and I was going to become a missionary nurse, because that's the only thing a woman can do single. Because I was garbage. No godly man was going to want me. So obviously I was never going to get married, never going to have children, right? Like all these things.
Right.
It's just like nurse and teacher, right? Nurse and teacher.
Right. Those are your options. If you're female,
something like that.
Get married and have kids, or be a nurse or be a teacher. Those are your only options. So I went for nursing, and by the end of my first semester, I had met my future partner, and I had begun to hate science, which I had always loved. And I was like, this is not okay. Like, I don't want to ruin my love for science, because if I hate science, I can't do this job, right? My job is science.
Right.
And we had already kind of decided we were going to get married and all of this stuff. So my second semester, I switched to being a Bible major, because that's much more important for a pastor's wife to know, because he was he was a preacher boy. And, I did tell him about my abuse, and he didn't reject me. And so that was my sign from God that this was the man for me, because I told him and he didn't, be like, oh no, we're done.
Can I ask you, did he grow up in the same, I don't want you to tell any part of his story that, you're not comfortable with, because I understand that stories are sacred and your story is yours, his story is his. But did he grow up in the same denomination as you? Was he also IFB?
Sort of.
Okay. I was just curious,
So the IFB has different camps, right? Okay. Different groups that associate with each other, but they're not under associations. I mean, some of them are like Northern Baptists or Missionary Baptists or whatever, but the Independent Baptists are not. They're loosely associated. They'll say that they're not a denomination, but they absolutely are. It's just which camp. And the camps tended to be grouped by Bible colleges, right? So his church, he moved around a lot when he was a child, and then the church that he graduated from high school from would have been considered liberal by my church's standards. So my church, women were not allowed to wear pants. You couldn't go to movies. The church would actively preach about what music you should and shouldn't listen to, what TV shows you should and shouldn't watch. So that's why, what books you should and shouldn't read. People in the church who did not follow those guidelines while they weren't excommunicated, they were definitely looked down on. They were limited in what ministries they were allowed to participate in. So that's why I'm very, very comfortable calling it a cult, because it was very much information control and thought control and emotional control in the thing.
Was Bill Gothard a factor in that?
We were not
teachings, or
not knowingly. Like when I saw some of the Bill Gothard things on Shiny Happy People and previously to that, they were not unfamiliar. The teachings were not unfamiliar to me, but the way they were presented was different. We were much more involved in James Dobson, Focus on the Family, was a big thing, Sword of the Lord type stuff.
Right.
So the teachings were there, but they weren't associated with IBLP specifically.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And the Christian schools were the big push rather than homeschool.
Okay.
I was homeschooled because of the missionary aspect of our life.
Yeah.
And then I homeschooled our kids because we couldn't afford Christian school. Homeschooling was cheaper, right?
Okay.
And so we used the same to homeschool our kids that I had used when I was a kid, the same curriculum, a Becca curriculum out of Pensacola. So I went to Pensacola for a year, met my future partner. We ended up, we kind of had decided we were going to get married. And so I did not return after that first year. And I was actually kind of surprised my parents allowed me to not go back to school because they had always been kind of big on college.
Okay.
But later they kind of admitted like we didn't have the money to send you back, right? Because a lot of ministry people do not have money. You don't get rich in ministry. And they had put a lot of my siblings' education, college education on credit. And so they were kind of maxed out, tapped out on that in that way. So I got married 2 months before I turned 20. I was 19 when I got married. And that was in 98. And in 2001, we moved out to New York State to help a fellow Pensacola grad start a church in the Capital Region area. Not that there weren't churches there, but in this particular little city that he wanted to start the church in, there wasn't a fundamental Baptist church.
Gotcha.
So they're very much of the mindset like our way is the only real way. We are the ones with the true gospel. Yep. These compromisers that let you wear pants or let you listen to the Christian rock and those aren't real Christians. Heard all of that all growing up, sermons against Amy Grant and Steve Green and all those guys. And so that was like my training ground for ministry, right?
Yeah. And
ministry didn't really shift. This ministry, like, there were a few things that were different, like the pastor's wife wore pants and wearing pants wasn't a big deal, right? Like, so that was kind of an adjustment I had to make. But the music was still that high control of what music is okay and what music is not. And we helped, going door to door, passing out flyers and inviting people to church and starting a bus route. And we did all those things, and I'd worked on buses since I was in junior high, bringing kids into the church and working in the children's ministry and done all of those things. So that was for the first 9 years, we were the assistant pastor, kind of in charge of the children's stuff, right?
Can I ask, how did that feel at that time in the initial stages of ministry? You've been from the womb raised up, and some of that wasn't that good. There's a lot of stuff, weight of ministry, sexual abuse, secrets, purity culture, suicidal ideation, all of that stuff. But how did it feel to be a pastor's wife at that point, in the beginning stages? What did that feel like? Was it good?
Beginning stages, so a lot of that programming from my past embedded the idea that I had to prove to God I was worth saving, because I'd been told I was walking garbage. I was a waste of oxygen. I was, right? So, but God had given me, and I say this, I'm going to sound very sarcastic in a lot of the ways I reference this, but that's from this perspective now. God had given me the grace of giving me a good, godly, man to accept me, even though I was not pure and whatever. And so I needed to prove to God that I was worth having given those things to. Like, while salvation was supposed to be a free gift, there was definitely the bait and switch. So the salvation's free, but once you get saved, you gotta start putting out to prove how much you love God and prove how much you're how thankful you are. how grateful you are that he saved you.
Prove how worthy you are of God's unconditional, I use air quotes, unconditional love. I mean, which is such an oxymoron. That doesn't make any sense, but
yes.
And now you're so blessed. You're so blessed that the debt becomes even greater.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the tally sheet doesn't get erased, it grows. And so that was kind of my mindset, like ministry had been my life, right? So this was nothing different to me. This was nothing new. Some of the rules were different, like clothing expectations or whatever, because you could wear pants now, but none of it was odd or out of the ordinary, like the going 3 times a week and to church and going soul winning and preparing, going bus calling on Saturday and doing all the things was just routine. It was habit. It's just what you do. It was my life. It had always been my life. So this was nothing shocking to me, nothing even stressful. Right. So being in ministry, like I remember being, like I have to live up to the pastor's wife, measurement of what people expect, because you're no longer the kid, you're now the wife, right? So that's a level up of stress and expectations a little bit. But at the same time, I was used to it because I'd been doing it my whole life. I knew what the expectations were. I could just step into it and do the things, right?
The game, yeah.
And it's weird looking back because, hindsight's 2020. But even during those times, I was still dealing with depression and kind of suicidal at times, but it was just, it's ministry, it's what you do, and God has chosen to, this vile creature, he has put you in ministry and left you. So prove that you're worthy. And my partner grew up, his parents were Christian school teachers, so he had exposure to ministry, but not to the level that I did. And he had some major mental health things going on that I knew nothing about at the time. And I had mental health stuff, and I had never, other than him, no one knew. I told no one about my abuse, right? Not my parents didn't know, just the abuser, me, and my partner. And so I'm still carrying that, and I'm acting like, I'm operating as if it didn't affect me. Right. It didn't bother me. Like there was no issue. Right. And I couldn't figure out why, like, the part of marriage that is supposed to be the most special and amazing part of marriage, sex, I wanted nothing to do with it. It disgusted me. It made me sick every time it happened. Right.
Makes sense.
But I'm fine.
Yeah.
That part of, abuse didn't happen or the abuse didn't affect me. Right. That's just normal. Everybody goes through. Right. Like, I didn't know any different. That didn't happen to everybody. That's right. Like, I knew it wasn't okay, and that it would destroy my parents' ministry if I ever said anything. But at the same time, I was like, this is just normal because this is life, right?
It's just what you do. This is what you do.
Yeah, it's a weird what a child's brain will do to help you survive and get you through. Yeah.
Well, and because a child's brain is not fully developed. I mean, there's research that says, your reasoning, your prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed till you're 25, 30. And so that's what our brains do, though. Our brains will try to make sense of situations that make absolutely no sense. And a lot of times, I mean, as in your case, in my case, now mine didn't happen till we were actually in the ministry. My growing up years look different from yours, but like, that's just what you do, in order for you to cope and move on and survive each day just with activities of daily living. I mean, your brain has to do that.
Yeah. We make a couple of assumptions. You can tell me what you think about these, whether I'm all washed up or not, but a couple of assumptions. Sarah Bessie said the church didn't have room for my grief. They didn't have time because keeping the trains running, we're doing the show, we're making things happen. We don't have time for that. But I would suggest also that the church doesn't know how to heal trauma, and you're trying to survive. You know, your we call it downstairs brain isn't engaged.
You're in survival mode.
Survival mode. That relates a lot with Laura's story also. Do you agree with that? Is that
I actually very much do agree with the church does not allow room for grief. My grandfather just passed away the beginning of this month, and it caused me to have to be back in proximity with my family, whom I am no contact with at the moment. And because I was not going to let them take away saying goodbye to my grandfather from me, you know. So while I didn't have to engage with them directly, I did have to be in proximity, and sitting through a Christian funeral, being on the outside of Christianity, I'm just like, me and my kids, we were all like, what is this bullshit? What are they doing? Yeah. And with my psychology training that I have thus far, I'm like, they have to, you know, put out this story of heaven, right, to keep people from being sad, you know, like, oh, he's in a better place, or he's with God now, and they're with whatever, and the story of heaven. And like, I'm going through this, and a lot of my family is still, whether they're fringe believers or not, like, heaven is the story we tell ourselves, to help with that. And I'm sitting there going, I understand psychologically why the need for heaven, but the church uses it to a different degree. So the church would be like, oh, he's in heaven now, so you shouldn't be sad. Like, you should be happy that your dad's in heaven now. I'm like, screw that. Like, I'm allowed to be sad. My grandfather's not here anymore. I'm allowed to be.
It's actually the church does not allow that. Feel. Yeah, it's the
Mm-hmm.
best thing you could feel because it's appropriate. It's
right. Yeah. The church does not allow actual human emotion. They're like, these are the emotions you're allowed to feel only in these situations, nothing else. You're allowed to be happy.
Yep.
You can only be sad for a very short period of time, and only for major things like the death of a child or the death of a loved one or whatever, but only for a short period of time. Then you need to get over it and get back to work.
Yep. That's right.
So like, get over it and get back in, you know, in line.
And some of the things they use is that manipulation that you were talking about, you know, well, your grandfather wouldn't want you to be sad for this long. Well, your husband wouldn't want you to still be mourning his loss, or, you know, your child wouldn't want you to be, you know, in bed with depression, you know. So it's just like that psychological, I mean, it's emotional abuse. It's psychological abuse. It is. Let's just call it what it is.
And they're denying people their ability to be human.
That's right.
The church's view on mental health is abhorrent. Right. They're in denial of anything mental health related, depression, anxiety. Just pray more, read your Bible more, pray more, read your Bible more. And
then if you can't do those things,
that really comes out in my experience. And it's sickening and infuriating. It makes me very angry.
Yeah. No, and this is where, I can feel my blood pressure. Thank goodness I'm on medicine for that. But I mean, it's these kind of things that just, they really get my blood boiling, just because, Carl and I were just talking about that, I believe today or last night, about how we're allowed to have basically one emotion, which is what you just said. We have to have joy. Joy in all circumstances, no matter what happens.
The joy of
the
the
joy of the
Lord.
Lord. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so if we're not joyful, then maybe you don't really have the Lord in your
You're bitter.
heart. And I'm just
Yep.
like, yeah,
That root of bitterness.
yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
and then abuse, in my opinion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you are actually doing the work to become more informed with religious trauma. But I feel like when you do that, I mean, that just opens the door wide for abuse. I mean,
Oh, yes.
if I always, and not only abuse from others, but abuse of self.
Yep.
Abuse of
You
self.
tend to, you start, well, this is how the pastor and the Bible say I'm supposed to feel,
Mhm.
but I don't feel this way. So I must be sinning. So then I need to, God isn't answering my prayer. So it must be on me. I have to work harder. Yeah. The problem is me. God always answers prayer, right?
Mhm.
He always, if you're praying to be more spiritual, if you're praying to be more right with him, he's gonna answer yes. So if you're not, it's you. You're the problem. And that's something else the church does is if things in someone's life don't fall into their explanations, the problem is never that the God lied or the Bible's wrong. It's always that it's the person's fault.
Or it's not
No matter if they're doing everything.
Yeah.
It's them.
It can't be
It's
something
them.
that the church is doing or not doing.
Not
It always
doing.
falls
Yeah.
back on the person. But we've
Yes.
kind of gotten you off track of your story, and I apologize, but this is all such really, really good conversation to be having. So let's pick it up where you're in ministry. Okay.
Yes. So we went out and we're helping to start this church, and it was very familiar because our church in the mission field was smaller, right? And so that process was very familiar to me because it was a smaller church at first, and it was, all hands on deck and well, sort of, and like, the 2 or 3 families doing everything to keep the church, afloat, and all the ministries and all of that stuff, right?
Right.
And then like the pastor, when we started having children, I started being back up. Before we started having children, when we first got married, I was in charge of the money because my partner was like, I'm not that great with being like frugal, and you're really good at being frugal because what choice do you have when you come from nothing?
Right.
So you handle the money, and like if we can't afford it, you tell me we can't afford it, and we'll figure something else out and we'll do something. So we get into ministry, and when your pastor is a rich boy from the richest town, one of the richest towns in Michigan, whose dad worked for General Motors, who never had to worry about money and had no clue how to handle money, he expects you to be able to do things on a and we weren't even being paid by the church at this point. My partner was working a second job, right? And so the pastor is like, okay, we want you to do this, and you need to be here, and you need to do that, and you need to. And I'm trying to pay the bills, and I'm, doing the grocery, trying to do grocery shopping with money we don't have. And finally, I'm like, we can't go to this activity because we don't have the money to put the gas in the car. We can't buy this for the church activity because we don't have the money. If we do that, we can't pay our electric bill, or we can't make our house payment. And rather than going to the pastor and being like, hey, we really can't afford to do this because that's really not an option, right? My partner took over the finances and just didn't tell me what was going on, right? Never told me where we were. And for a lot of our ministry life, we lived on credit cards. We would buy groceries on the credit card because we did not have the option. We didn't have a choice. Right. We were forced to go into debt for the ministry, and we are still paying that off. Like, but anyway, and the church finances were badly handled, which, church members eventually dealt with that with the pastor because he had no clue how to handle money. because he's a rich boy from a rich family
Right.
who never had to handle money.
Right.
But that was a whole other nightmare. But so for a long time, I had no clue what the finances were, which was a stress point to me because, like, I had moved around so much and everything had constantly changed in my life so much. The like being in one place for a long period of time was like, I never said I want this kind of house or I want, this kind of thing, because I knew that was dangerous to the ministry. A wife who was like, no, I want these things. And I was like, it's not about things as long as we have a place to live. But that fear of being homeless was always in the back of my mind because I knew he was requiring us to do things we did not have the money to do.
Right.
Right. And I wasn't allowed to work because wives aren't supposed to work. Right. Wives are supposed to stay home and take care of the children.
Yeah.
And then we started having kids and things started shifting for me where I was like, I do not want my kids to feel what I felt. I do not want my kids to deal with what I had to deal with.
Can I stop you there for just a second? Because you're the second person that we've interviewed that said when they had children, that's when kind of like everything shifted. They did not want and it had to do with sexual abuse as well. Did not want and I don't know that that's your story, but they did not want it was about the same age that she had experienced her own sexual abuse. And she was just like, I will not let my own child deal with this.
Yeah, that comes up later.
Okay.
But, so the pastor he had at that point 2 children, and he would brag about how on deputation they would be at a church and they would be talking because he's a talker, and, he would just talk for hours. And they would realize, oh, it's late, we need to go. And they'd go looking for their kids and find them curled up in a corner somewhere asleep. And he would brag how my kids are so resilient or so flexible that they, if they got tired, they would just go put themselves to bed somewhere. Me, in my heart, I'm like, that's evil.
Yeah.
Like, that is neglect. You're neglecting your child's needs for routine and sleep because children need structure. They need routine. They need adequate sleep. And if your children are crawling in a corner and going to sleep, that means you're ignoring their needs. Your children are having to meet their own needs.
Right.
And so that hit. And so I started being like, no, I can't do this because my kids need to nap. My kids need routine. This is nap time and we're not doing anything during nap time. So I started catching some grief for that. My partner started catching grief for that. And so then we would like, okay, well, they can nap at the church and we're going to do stuff before and after, or somebody else can watch them while they nap, or you can watch them while they nap and your, partner can be over there, or they can nap and you can do other work around the church building while they're napping, that kind of stuff. So, I was starting to be like drawing little boundaries, and those boundaries were never honored, right? They were always pushed against.
Yep.
And it's hard when you're in ministry and you're the assistant pastor, everybody says you go to your pastor for guidance and counsel and marriage advice and whatever. You cannot do that when your pastor is your boss.
That's right.
Right? Because you're like, if I go to the pastor, he's going to fire my husband. Then we're going to, we are going to be homeless and starving, and our kids are going to be sleeping on the street and whatever. Right? So when you're the assistant pastor's wife, you have no options. You can't go to the deacons. You can't go to the pastor.
Right.
Because it's going to cost you your job. And so that's that next level of nobody can find out what's going on at home. Right. Yep. So my partner's mental health things made home very difficult. Right. Because they had, I don't want to tell too much of their story, but they had mental health things going on, self-loathing, but when you hate yourself so much, eventually it spills over onto everybody else, right? Sure. And the religion teaches you to hate yourself. So,
right.
So on top of the religions, we're gonna hate ourselves. You have this other layer of stuff and abuse that happened in their childhood, which added to all of, right? And so that tended to spill over at home. And I remember there being times where I was like, I wish he would just hit me, because if he would hit me, then I have evidence. Then maybe I can go to somebody. Then maybe I can do something. And he would never do that. That was not, and what happened was never like intentional. But like being neglected and emotional needs being neglected. And then the wife has to put out no matter how the husband is acting.
Right.
Aspect of the wife's role, right? You have to meet his needs. His needs are the most important. On top of my history of abuse, it didn't help, right? It just made things so. Once again, we had that perfect ministry family facade.
Yep.
And home was rough.
Yeah.
Home was very difficult. So for 9 years, we were assistant pastor and wife, and all of our kids were born during that 9-year period. At the end of like the 9 years, the head pastor, the church that he grew up in, that pastor committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
And he went back and he preached the funeral for that pastor and like helped the church for a couple of weeks. And then he came back, and then like every few months he would go for a weekend to help out the church. So about a year after that pastor passed away, the church called him and said that they wanted to call him as their pastor. He was already the pastor of a church.
Yeah.
But they were asking him to come be their pastor. And so he decided to do that. And my partner candidated for the head pastorship, and he was accepted with a 75% vote, which is not great in ministry, because that other 25% is walking out the door.
Yeah. Or they're going to make your life rough for sure.
Yeah, right. And so the first year of being head pastor was very interesting because there was a lot of shifting and a lot of people leaving and new people coming, and the stress of being the head pastor, right? The one responsible. And that's when a lot of the information about the church's actual finances and the state that the church finances were in and all of those things. Because at one point the church had taken financial stuff away from the pastor and given it to set up a treasurer, but the treasurer wasn't somebody who was necessarily going to say no to the pastor, so there were still things. Eventually the deacons, we got some good deacons, and they set up a plan of, this is how we're going to get the church on better financial footing, right? And during that time, the pressure of being the head pastor and the leader and the one that's supposed to have the vision and all of that was adding to the issues that my partner was having. And I started having I was expected to teach like ladies' Bible study. And I'm looking at stuff to teach for ladies' Bible study, and I'm like, I'm sitting there going, over this, and I'm trying to not teach the hateful, judgmental God that I was taught, because I'm like, I can't, how am I supposed to expect these people to love and worship this monster that is being presented, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you're supposed to draw people with love, and Jesus said, by your love people will know me, right? So I was like trying to focus on what Jesus was saying, but at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm going, but that's not what happens, and that's not how it works. And that, but if you love somebody, you don't let this thing continue to happen to them. If you love somebody, you step in and you stop certain behaviors, right? So like my brain was going, wait. And around this time, my third born was the same age that I was. So she was my oldest daughter, was the same age that I was when my abuse started.
Gotcha.
And I didn't put that together till later. But like things like just stuff wasn't adding up for me, right? And we celebrated our 14th anniversary, and we went on an anniversary trip. First trip we had taken, just us, that wasn't to see family in like 12 years. So and we went on that trip, and we came back, and about 2 months later, my partner sat me down and was like, I'm transgender. And I was like, what? So like I knew I have family members that are among the LGBTQ population. And while my parents were never like, we hate them, right? We don't support their lifestyle. We love them, but we don't support the lifestyle. And so I was never, so part of all of my growing up, things that didn't wash with me were the hatred, the bigotry, the spewing of hate. God is love, but we're going to say that these people deserve death.
That's right.
Whether that was people of color, people, from a different part of the world, Arabs or, or LGBTQ, the hate that was spewed from pulpits about other pastors, right? Like they would, because they didn't do ministry the same. They would trash them from the pulpit.
Right.
A man thought, a pastor would have an affair and be removed from ministry. You said nothing was said. Silence, crickets. But if a pastor decided to not do a bus ministry, he was as bad as Cain. Mark him and don't associate, right? And so that never really sat right with me. And so then my partner comes out and tells me this, and I'm just like, okay. Because what options do I have? Like divorce isn't an option, right? I once again, I can't tell anyone this, because if I say anything, we're done. Where are we going to live? We were living in the church parsonage. Well, in an upstairs apartment at the church building. Where are we going to live? What are we going to do for jobs? Because the only thing my partner has ever been is ministry. That's what his college degree is for. How do you get a job outside ministry with that kind of degree? So once again, I'm in that position. We went home to visit my family for Christmas, and I walked in the living room, and my little girl was sitting on my abuser's lap.
Oh no. And
something in me just snapped.
Yeah.
Like I felt sick in that moment, but my, keep it together facade, everything's fine, took over.
Yeah.
And from then on, from my partner's coming out, and that situation blew up the walls that my child brain had built around my trauma. And I immediately started exhibiting major PTSD symptoms. I was reliving nightmares of the abuse. I was having flashbacks. I was disassociating to the point where I was losing time. And I was doing this while teaching Sunday school, while working on the bus. these flashbacks were happening, this association was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else was seeing it, but I was experiencing it.
Yeah.
And I was just like,
just tell me
yeah,
how you feel about it. So not only do you have all of that PTSD that you're talking about, but also there's this impending doom of everything I've ever been, is about to be taken away from me. If I make a misstep, or if I go a little further, then who am I? Who am I without all that stuff? And since the womb, I've been in church and it's been everything. And I'm second, I'm third, I'm last, whatever. That was also part of it, right? I mean,
that identity crisis hit a little bit later. But the threat, yes, that threat of, oh shit, we're going to lose everything,
right.
was that was a constant threat. Now, my partner was like, obviously I can't do anything because that's not what God, that's not what God intended. That's not how God does things, right? So still having that religious mindset of,
Sure.
This is what I am, but I can't do anything about it. I have to figure out how to be happy as what God created. Yeah.
Suppress.
So we went through probably, I think it was September. December was when we had gone and visited my family, and my PTSD it blew up, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until February that things got so bad that I went down and handed him our shotgun that I had been sitting upstairs in our living room with the shotgun on my lap for 20 minutes while the kids were sleeping. I handed him the shotgun and said, I have to find help. Right? So one of our deacons at the time had outside mental health training. He had been in a training to be an addict recovery coach or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That is not what he was doing for work, but he had a degree in that.
Okay.
And so they arranged for our in-laws, who had moved to New York at that point, to take our guns for safety purposes, right? And then I started counseling with him and his wife. His wife was also a trained counselor, had been through a program. He had also been through some stuff, so he had life experience as well as training, and she had just the book knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was easier to connect with the person who had real life experience than the person who had only the book training.
Sure.
Which ended up causing some issues. But at the time, still nobody else knew about my partner's issues going on. Everybody, just me. All of a sudden, I was having, I was falling apart and all this stuff. So I'm counseling with them. Nobody in the church knows anything, as far as I know, other than this one deacon. And we get to, I think, April-ish, and we're in a counseling session, and I'm talking about how I'm really struggling, and the deacon's sitting across the table from me going, well, you really need to lean on your spouse. This is the time you really need to lean in and have them be your source of strength and support for you, not knowing that my partner was not stable enough to be that for me at the time. Right. Because he at the time they were going back and forth. I am, but I'm not allowed to be. I am, but I'm not allowed to be. But this is who I really am. But and struggling. And finally, I had to tell this deacon, because they're like, this is who you need to lean into, and this is who you need to count on and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in April, they removed me from all ministry. They removed me from teaching ladies Bible study, from Sunday school, from the nursery. Because at that time, I was in maybe one church service every 2 weeks because of the amount of ministry I was doing. I was teaching Sundays. I was teaching a Sunday school class. I was teaching a second hour class. I was teaching a Wednesday night class. And then I was in nursery on Sunday nights frequently, right? So I was maybe in one church service a month or every other week. And they were like, okay, so you need to be in church, right? And you need to not have all this stress. And I really think that they meant well by removing me from my ministry positions. But in doing that, they literally obliterated my identity.
Yeah.
The ministry had been my identity
Right.
since I was 5 years old. And they had no concept
Yeah.
of what that did to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very, very dark time where I was completely lost because, like, I'm supposed to be proving to God how worthy I am. I'm supposed to be proving to God how thankful I am. And now they're not letting me do that. They're not letting me work is how I proved it, right? And they're not letting me do that. And I was homeschooling 4 kids at this point, all under the age of 10, I believe. Maybe a little older than 10, but my 4 are 2 years apart, and my youngest at 3 had started preschool. So I had 3, 5, 7, and 9. And I was nannying for 3 others.
Wow.
And doing all the ministry stuff and keeping the house and keeping, all the family, right?
You know what's so interesting to me is that the church gave you your identity and then they stripped it away from you.
Yes.
That's
completely.
Crazy.
They just,
crazy.
All of a sudden, I was pastor's wife in name only. Right? And so I'm continuing to counsel with this deacon, and because he had knowledge of mental health, right? Like, he could see the anxiety, he could see the triggers, and he would check in on me at church and be like, how are we doing? And we had like this code phrase that we would say, and I'd be like, oh, I'm just ducky, because when you watch a duck on a water, they're calm, right? They're cool, collected, but underneath it's churning because their feet are moving.
Right.
And he would be like, how you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm just ducky. And that would be our signal, like, I am not doing okay.
Surviving.
And there were a couple times where he would like reach out and take my hand, or like if we were shaking hands, because our church did that shaking hand thing, he would just kind of hold on a little bit longer, just as like, a support. I'm here, I understand, I get it, or whatever. People started seeing that in a negative way. They see the deacons removed me from ministry, and all of a sudden this deacon is providing these extra support things.
Kind to you.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid.
Right. So that becomes a problem later. But during this time, my husband is also trying to find, because the deacons know now, right? Because I had to tell somebody.
Right.
And of course he had to tell the rest of the deacons. So now life is a giant question mark. Like, what's going to happen? My husband is sent to a couple different places for counseling. And, it just, obviously it's, Christian counseling isn't going to be the kind of support and help and therapy that a transgender person needs.
That's right.
Because
That's right. Yep.
It's all denial of the reality of who you are. And I'm falling apart, and my partner's falling apart, and the deacons are like, okay, this isn't good for anybody, right? You don't need the stress of ministry. The church is not doing well because the leadership is not doing well. And so they fired us.
Oh my God.
They gave my partner, they're like, we'll let you stand up and resign. So you're quitting, but really it was the deacon saying, oh, you've got to go.
Yeah.
And when my partner stood up in church and resigned, the reason that they told was your family struggles, right? Marriage struggles.
Mm.
With the things the people had seen before, immediately the rumor mill begins to churn. And guess whose fault it was that we were having marriage problems?
Yours.
Guess whose fault it was we had to leave the ministry?
Yours.
It was me. And so all of the hate, all of the bitterness, all of the upset that people felt about, because people feel very upset when a pastor resigns, when, changing leadership in a church is very scary. Yeah. So all those natural, normal emotions and feelings that people feel all got pointed at me. And I got the dirty looks, and I got the comments, and I got from people that I had spent 12 years pouring into, serving. Within a matter of 20 minutes, I was the pariah. I was, and so I told the deacon in, I think, April. By August, they said we had to go. And so that was when we put in our resignation when we got fired. And we were allowed to stay in the parsonage until the end of October. Mm. So my partner was given 2 months to find a job, find us a place to stay. Can you do that? Can you find a job?
I know, especially when all he's done is ministry, right? I mean,
right. Yeah, no, it's not possible.
Yeah.
So we ended up moving in with his parents, which was a whole nother level of nightmare. But in October, I finally, because I had not spoken to my parents since January, February. When the PTSD hit, I cut off my parents. No explanation, no nothing, just stopped talking to them because I couldn't handle hearing that person's name. I couldn't handle seeing a picture of that person. I couldn't, it would send me into immediate flashbacks.
Right.
And so in October, when they told us when we had to be out by, I called my mom and was like, you were out of a job, but before we're out of a job, I need you to come out because I have something I need to tell you. So they came out and I told them about my abuse. And my father's reaction was, that was then, this is now, how do we move forward? Draw a line in the sand, move forward. My mother's reaction was immediately, I'm such a horrible parent. I'm such a horrible mom. And while I understand part of that, that's also very typical of her reaction to anything. It's about her, right? Everything's about her.
Yeah.
And so I ended up for the next several months being my mother's therapist while trying to hold my mental health together.
Right.
And keep my family from completely being obliterated. Because what the, what's going on. So we ended up living with my in-laws for a year, I think, a year and a half, maybe. In our marriage, there was a period where my kids and I came out and stayed with my parents for a month, which was very interesting because I wanted boundaries put in place. And they were very, very tenuously accepted. I was almost immediately under pressure to forgive and forget and go back to normal.
Yeah.
And that showed, that kind of opened my eyes to some things okay, my parents really do care more about their image than me, right? As a child, I came to that conclusion, but your behavior now in this situation is proving that child belief was absolutely 100% on the mark. And while I was, trying to find Christian, counseling through this, because the deacon was also then like, okay, this is more than I have training for, more than I can handle, and kind of shifted us over to another pastor and his wife in the area for counseling. I'm shaking my head in repulsion, okay, because these people had no business touting themselves as counselors of any kind, right? It was horrific. It was re-traumatized. It was even more traumatizing. So I'm trying to deal with, and through all of this, everything, like my identity's gone, my marriage is barely hanging on. I'm terrified that if we get divorced, God's coming after my children, because God doesn't punish you directly. He punishes you through the people around you. And the first people he'll go after are your children when he wants to punish you, right? Like, because that's the church teaching spinning in my head. And so I'm like trying to find answers on how to heal from PTSD, how to get over PTSD. I'm like researching and doing all of this stuff. And I laugh because otherwise I scream. This other pastor, honestly told me if I wanted the nightmares and flashbacks to stop, I needed to forgive my abuser. That is how you get the PTSD to go away. That's how you heal. By forgiving the abuser is how you heal your PTSD. And I'm like, pretty sure that's not going to work, because I had thought that multiple times I had forgiven him.
Yeah.
Right? We had a conversation in college where he sort of apologized. And I was pressured into the I forgive you, right? Because he said, I'm sorry. So you have to say, I forgive you. And now everything's fine.
Right.
And then so when he told me that, I'm like, I'm trying to forgive. And he's like, you're not trying hard enough. If you really forgave them, then the nightmares would stop. And the PTSD, you have bitterness. You have a root of bitterness. And you need to ask God to dig that root of bitterness out, right? And then the Gothard bullshit came in. The wife handed me the piece of paper from the IBOP crap that was like, God allows this for your spiritual strengthening. And what did you do that caused, right? Like, as if my entire life of it's always the woman's fault. It's always the girl's fault. Even if she's 5 years old, it's the girl's fault.
Yep.
As if that didn't put enough of the blame on me. This pastor's wife hands me this piece of paper and is like, read over this and pray about it and tell me what you think. And I read through that piece of paper and about lost my shit. I was just like, what the fuck? Like, I was a child who had no fucking clue about any of this. I was wearing all the things I was supposed to wear, the long culottes, the long loose and lots of it, right? I was completely covered, but it still happened. Like, how do I avoid tempting when my existence is what is the temptation? I like, and then, this constant, well, God loves you so much. And then you're telling me at the same time, God did this to you on purpose.
Right.
God put you in the family he wants you in. Okay. So God put me with the person he knew was going to rape me for 3 years.
Right.
God is love, and God is a loving father, but a loving father would step and protect his child.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of sitting there watching me and like the God is with you all the time, not comforting to an abuse victim. Because, okay, so you're telling me God was sitting there watching while this person raped me. This is what you're saying to me. Like, so I'm getting all of the Christian platitudes and answers, and I'm going, I'm thinking, like, do you hear yourself?
Right.
And when I would say back, okay, so God was sitting in the room watching him rape me. No. God was there holding you and comforting you. And I'm like, bullshit. Like, I was not comforted. I was in pain. I was terrified. I was alone. I felt completely alone. Like, what are you talking about? God was not there. If God was, like, it was easier for me as a child to believe that God just didn't want anything to do with me and turned his back on me than to process the thought that God was sitting in that room.
Right.
Every time that happened.
Yep.
Like, what? Or God put me in a family where he knew I was going to constantly feel like I didn't belong because my family is super intelligent and super talented. And I have learning disabilities and I have hearing problems and I have reading problems that made me struggle in school and gave my abuser more ammo to make me feel like a worthless piece of shit. Like, but God loves you. God is all loving and God is, and that's kind of where things really started to crumble. When I got into Christian therapy and they're trying to tell me all these things and I'm like, it isn't adding up.
Right.
Like, there had been things that always didn't add up and I was just like, don't think about it. Don't think about it. Don't, ignore it. It's just, you're just not understanding it. It's something wrong with you that that 2 + 2 isn't equaling 4, but that's a me problem, not a them problem. Yeah. Until I got to this point and I was just like, I can't pretend this makes sense anymore. Right. Like the IFB God and the answers you're trying to give me and this, it just was crumbling. And so I'm doing the research on my own about PTSD, what it is, what causes it, how do you heal from it? And all of my research is like, this is a brain injury, a physical phenomenon that you have to work through and intense, like therapy, different types of therapy work for different people. And this is something you really have to work through. This is not a forgive them and you'll be better. This is not a bitterness issue. This is a actual physical wound to the brain and psyche. And eventually, through a mess of circumstances, that pastor's wife accused me of chasing her husband because I was looking at him too much in church. He was leading the singing and preaching the sermon.
Where are you supposed to look?
I spent 6 months in that church staring at the floor because she was saying that I looked at her husband too much. And so they caused me some really serious religious trauma, PTSD, with their stupidity and shenanigans. And she didn't like it. This started because me being an intuitive person, I called her out on something in one of our sessions and I'm like, we're both kind of like insecure about certain things and we just and she did not like, she's like, I am not insecure. I am confident in my identity in Christ and I am this and I am that. And I'm like, oh shit, like, oops. And after that, it was like every 2 months, there was a new accusation of me doing something, right? I had said at one point during our counseling stuff that when I was out here with my parents, that, she's like, are you even coming back to your husband, to your marriage? And I said, well, yeah, I promised your husband I would, so I am. She's like, oh, so a promise to my husband is more important than your wedding vows? But he was the pastor, and I was still operating under that. The pastor is the supreme authority, right? You're like, God, the pastor, and you can't hear God, but you can hear the pastor, right? The pastor talks to you. Yeah. And in the IFB, the pastor's word is the word of God. Like,
he's the one that hears from God, right?
Yeah, if a pastor tells you don't date this person, don't marry this, you're not supposed to because God told the pastor. So at the time that I had made that statement, I was still operating under that schematic, that operation system of the pastor is the end all authority, right? And so she took that as part of part of her ammunition against me and saying that I was after. She started warning other women in the church. If there were a couple men that I had similar interests. Like we shared an interest in like Sherlock Holmes stories or something random. And I would talk to them in church, and the next week they would go out of their way to avoid me. And I found out from another lady who she warned about me. She's like, the pastor's wife is warning the women in the church that you're not safe to allow around their husbands because you're a man chaser. And that, so if these people avoid you, that's why. And at that point, I was like out of options. Like, what am I, so I was like, I'm done counseling with you. And I had to go find another person to counsel with. And that person was like, yeah, those people, they're crazy. Like their reputation in the community is horrible. They're horrible people. They treat people horribly. Mm-hmm. But in the church, they present this, the perfect Christian, right? But the community's opinion of those people was completely different. And I didn't know that until this other therapist was like, yeah, no, don't listen to anything they say. No, they're wrong. Let's start over. Mm-hmm. And that Christian, that lady was extremely helpful. And she was studying to be a Christian counselor, but she was definitely on the more liberal side. So like a counselor that's a Christian, not a Christian counselor. Right. You know the difference, right? Yeah. So she is the one that actually started to help with that. Now my deconstruction, as things are crumbling, right? I'm like searching, like, okay, well, God is real, right? And Christianity is the truth, right? So, but maybe it's not this brand of Christianity. So I started looking for, one of my cousins shared a sermon that they had heard on Facebook, and I clicked on it, and the things this guy was saying, all like they made more sense. They like fit together, right? And it was Matt Chandler from Texas, the Village Church or something. Okay. And so I started listening to his sermons. I stopped going to the church because I couldn't, like, it was making me physically ill, giving me panic attacks to walk in the building because I knew I was under scrutiny constantly. She told us that she watched everything I did from the moment I walked in the door to the moment I left. And so, anxiety, all sorts of stuff that brought up. So I started listening to Matt Chandler's stuff, and he had a different perspective, right? Like a non-ISB perspective. And eventually, like, I'm out, right, of that church, and I'm trying to tell my partner, who is still dealing with stuff. Right. And finally he's like, well, we need to do this biblically. We need to like have a meeting and la da da. And I'm like, I'm not going to a meeting with them because it's just going to turn into a attack on me session. He's like, well, I'll go, then they can't like attack you. And we'll be like, we need these things to happen for us to be able to, stay here and stuff, handle this biblically, right? Well, he went into that meeting, and when he left, they had turned everything that we were saying needed to happen around and making everything my fault. Like they were not at fault. They handled everything perfectly. And I needed to submit to her critiquing and watching and everything, and prove myself until she felt comfortable with me being there, and she trusted me again. And he came home and said that, and I was like, excuse me? And this pastor was really good. And my partner goes, well, it's kind of like understandable. And I said, excuse me? Like, no. Remember what you went in there, what the requests were that you went in there with. And he was like, oh, yeah. And so then he called my dad, and he called his dad, and both of them were like, get out now. That they have issues, get out. So we then started planning like where are we going to go? Like, what are we going to do?
Mhm.
Right. Because we had moved to the area where that church was because of that church and the counseling and being under their care. And so now we're in this podunk town in the middle of upstate New York. And we're like, now what? What are we supposed to do now? And then my mother started having health issues again. And my sibling was not doing what they should be doing to honor their parents, right? Like, not, I was getting phone calls 600 miles away where my mother was incoherent. And I was having to call my friend who lived in town with my mother and be like, can you take her some food? Because her blood sugar is through the floor. Can you do this? Calling her, my mom's pastor, and being like, is there any way you can, like, from 600 miles away, I'm having to step in.
Right.
To take care of my parents because my sibling who lives 2 blocks from them isn't doing their job.
Mm-hmm.
But so we ended up deciding to move back to my hometown to be closer to my mom, to be there for, because of her health issues and things like that. Meanwhile, I'm listening to Matt Chandler sermons and some of these other guys, and stuff is making sense. Making more sense, but there's still stuff not adding up quite right. There's still things that are kind of like, that's kind of, but with them, there's way more room to agree to disagree. We're in the IFB, you're not allowed to disagree, you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to think for yourself. Outside of the IFB, there was more room for questions and differing opinions and things like that. So we moved back here and I start looking for therapists around here. We're going to church with my parents, which is another IFB church. And while they were more focused on, God is love, there were definitely the IFB doctrines. And one night we decided to stay home from church because we just were tired and didn't feel like going. And one of our kids said, but God will be mad at us if we don't go to church. And both my partner and I were both like, whoa, no. Like, nope. And we're done. Like, we're not putting, it brought to the front what our children were hearing, what they were learning. And we're like, no, this is not the God we want our kids to know, because we know this is not the God that's healthy and this is supposed to be, right? So then we had been living with my parents. We finally got our own place. And after we got our own place, we stopped going to their church, started looking for a different church. And we visited a church and the pastor preached and he sounded just like Matt Chandler, and he handled the Bible the way Chandler had. And he was from Texas. And I was like, okay, this looks like a place where I can, this looks okay, like a safe-ish church for me. And my partner kind of got, and the older kids decided to join the choir. And I tried to go to choir practice a couple times, and I went to the assistant pastor who was leading the choir, and I was like, what am I supposed to do if the songs you're singing aren't true for me? And he looked at me and he cocked his head and he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you're talking about this loving God who protects in the storms, and he's a protector and a rescuer. And I said, but God didn't protect me and he didn't rescue me and he didn't do all these things. And I said, so how am I supposed to stand up there and sing it? And he looked at me and goes, you don't. I said, what? He said, that's not your truth. That is not your experience. You can't sing that, because if you sing that, that's a lie. He's like, you don't sing it. And I was like, wait, what? A pastor is telling me that my experience with God can disagree with something the church is teaching, and I don't have to pretend that I agree with it? I was like, wait, what? What is this? This is weird. And that particular pastor became pretty good friends of ours, and he was very supportive of my doubting and my questioning and my, like, I came to him with like really hard questions and things, and I was like, and fears, and I was talking to him one conversation about the book of Revelation. He looks at me, he goes, Revelation's not like future events, right? And I went, excuse me? He goes, no, the book of Revelation is like a commentary on the political system that was happening at the time that it was written. Revelation has nothing to do with the future. I was like, excuse me? What are you saying? Like, I'm waiting for lightning to come out of the sky and strike the heretic, right? Yeah. And he's like, oh, no, like, here, look up these books and these articles and these. And so that sent me down a rabbit hole that basically obliterated everything I'd ever been taught about the Bible, right? Because I've been taught King James only. Right. King James is the only version, and this is what the translation means, and da 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 da. And I start reading these articles, and like major biblical scholars who have studied the Bible for years are like, yeah, that's a load of crap, that's bullshit over there. And this teaching is wrong. And the rapture teaching's only been around for 200 years. What? So in that church, even more stuff started to crumble. And I started to find my voice. I started therapy with that pastor's wife, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Christian counseling. Christians go to Christian counselors. And while she was more grounded, she was still very much God, the Bible. This is the way that, when I decided to go no contact with my family, she was like, okay, but we need to have an eye on reconciliation and forgiveness and la, 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 la. And I started butting heads with her because I'm like, because she's talking about abusive relationships with me in therapy. And I'm sitting here making connections in my brain, but that's what God does. But that's what God does. But so God is abusive? And she goes, no, God is loving and God is good. I'm like, but God tells you you're worthless without him, that you're nasty and nobody's going to want you but him. And he loves you more than anybody else possibly could. And nobody else is going to love you as much as he does. And I was like, how is that different than the abusive boyfriend we're talking about here? She's like, no, God is love. So whatever God does, it's out of love and it's good because God is good. And I just went, okay. And then I started school. I started going back to college because I wanted to be a counselor that helped people through the bullshit that I've been through. Right. And in my psychology, the more like I started listening to therapists on TikTok and on YouTube. This is before my TikTok phase. I started researching therapy books, and I read a really good book called The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse by Johnson and Van Vonderen. And while they're still like in the church, they really deal with how the position of pastor leads to spiritual abuse and spiritual treatment, abusive treatment of people in the church. And then I read Combating Cult Mind Control by Stephen Hassan. And that one just kind of blew up my world all over again because I was like, oh shit, I was in a cult. Right. I started having lots and lots of oh shit moments. And I was like, this is insane. So like, I still have no identity, right? Because my identity was the church. And, right. I'm working at this point, like I had been through a couple of jobs since we moved to Michigan. I worked third shift at McDonald's for a while I was homeschooling the kids still. And then we're like, okay, we can't do this anymore. My oldest was a senior in high school, and we're like, let's see if we can get them into Christian school. And we got a scholarship for all of our kids to go to this private Christian school in our town in November of 2019. And in March, yay, COVID.
Yay.
So that was an adventure. But our kids went to a Christian school for 3 years. And during this time, we're just getting farther and farther. Like, I'm finding more and more things that just don't make sense. And then the church chose to get rid of, or it was a mutual agreement of moving away from, because that music pastor was heading in a different direction than the lead pastor. The lead pastor was going more IFB, more like conservative type thing, and the other guy was like, that's not healthy, that's not, and so they ended up parting ways. And when that pastor left, we were like, and we're done, because he was the only reason we were still going to the church.
Yeah.
Because during this time I had been making posts on Facebook about spiritual abuse and about how, I was still like identifying as Christian and still saying I believed in God, but I was making posts about how this is not healthy. Like, the church is abusing people emotionally, church is abusing people mentally. Like, and I was like doing the church, like the global, big church thing.
Right.
But talking a lot specifically about IFB and my experience in it. Around this time is also when I did my interview on Preacher Boys podcast with Eric Skwarczynski. And that gets into way more detail about my childhood and all that. But the things are just, falling apart. And finally we're just like, yeah, no, we're done.
Mm.
And then I went back to college. I was working as a security guard dispatcher and during the day. And so between calls and stuff, I was doing my schoolwork. And literally every single course I took, whether it was psychology, history, science, English, because of the things they had us read, was just blowing up everything I had been taught. Because I was homeschooled and then I was Christian schooled, and I was realizing that my entire education was a lie. Like, outside of grammar and mathematics, which you really can't screw up, my history was completely skewed. My science was off. Like, everything was messed up. So I was like really digging into all these things, and I'm really digging into psychology and everything that I'm learning. I'm just like, every class was triggering at one point or another, because it was exposing how much of my life had been based on a complete lie.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh, okay. And for a period of time, I was without a therapist. So I was doing my own therapizing myself. Right. And like, watching these therapists on YouTube. And one of them was like, when you get to the point where like you've had trauma since all of your childhood, and you come to a point where you're just like, who am I? Like, for whatever reason, you've lost your identity. It can be terrifying. It can be a good thing. I was like, what are you talking about? It's a good thing. Like, what?
Yeah.
Because you get to rebuild yourself. You get to like tear everything out, move everything out of the way, and be like, okay, I want this in my life. I want my life to be based on this. I want and so through that, later on, one of my therapists asked me, she was like, so like, do you have a motto? Do you have, because your religion was your moral compass. What is your moral compass now? How do you decide? And that was something I really struggled with. And finally I was like, to the best of my ability, do no harm. And with the recognition that calling other people, setting boundaries and calling other people on their bullshit is not doing harm, right? Holding others accountable.
Yep.
Is not causing harm. But to the best of my ability, live my life in a way that causes no harm to other people. And she was like, wow, that took some thought. That's really good. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've had a few years to think about this, because so much of what was done in the name of love or religion or Christianity was intensely harmful. and is intensely harmful to so many people. And so finally I just got to the point where, like, you know, listening to podcasts about the Bible, studying things about the Bible, learning history from a non-Christian worldview perspective. And they talk about the Bible and how they discuss it and how they, like, its influence and how it came about and all this stuff. And I'm just like, it's just a book. It's just stories. It's just, it's not real. Like the fairy tales aren't real. You know, hell isn't anything to be afraid of. God is not going to strike you with lightning. You know, all of those things. And I'm just like, that kind of got to the point where, okay, so now what, you know? And so now we are trying to build community, find, you know, because the whole facade of community that the church appears to provide.
Right.
But, you know, that's, you know, how the process, the process of just coming to the point where, like, I can choose to not be hateful and I can choose to not be a bitter person, without the threat of being sent to hell, without the threat of being, you know, zapped by God, without, I don't have to have that constant threat over me to be a decent person, you know?
In fact, you already were that person.
Yeah, that's right.
And, you know, right. So your story is so captivating, and it's one of the most complete stories we've ever heard.
Absolutely.
It covers all of the stuff in it. And so we just want to say that we hear you and we believe you. And it's going to be helpful to other people. And you kind of gave us just maybe, we just got a few minutes left, but how are you doing now? I mean, just in general terms.
I much better. I mean, obviously I'm still in therapy because this is a long road, but
Absolutely.
You know, I had some chronic illness. I have fibromyalgia and some chronic illness issues that, honestly, since leaving the church and being no contact with my family, they haven't gone away, because that's not how it works, but it has gotten better. My PTSD symptoms right now are rough again, but that's just because of proximity to my family due to my grandfather's passing. But before that, they were very much under control, and I was able to function much better. So having left Christianity behind has given me more peace and is helping my body to heal from the physical trauma of all of that stress, and all of that, you know, that goes with it, because that constant stress, it takes a toll on your entire system. You know, the book The Body Keeps the Score. It does. You don't realize how much your body is remembering until you can get away from the triggers and step away to be able to heal and rest. Because you can't rest when you're in the church.
Yeah, and it sounds like early in your story you talked about, you know, the main deal being love, and that I'm supposed to be a person that loves others, and that was how Christians are supposed to be identified. And it sounds like that now, even with removing some of the things in your life, that's the person you are.
Right.
It sounds like that you're a person that loves other people, and that's enough. That's it. That's the main goal, right? That's
Yes.
all of it.
That is all of it.
Yeah.
That is my thing. I've told my partner, when I get my office, when I finally get into the place where I can and practice, I want that story about the starfish, the little boy on the beach with the starfish.
Mm-hmm.
And how he's throwing them back in the water, and an adult comes along and says, you're not going to make a difference. There's thousands of these starfish. And the little boy picks up the starfish and picks up one. He looks at it and he throws it back in the ocean. And he said, it made a difference to that one.
Right.
And that's kind of right now, my focus is making a difference to my kids and helping them heal from what we put them through as children unknowingly.
Mm-hmm.
Owning when they come to us with things that hurt them or whatever, owning our part of that, and working to place where I can be a therapist, counselor that can help others and make a difference to one. And if it's just one, then that makes it worth it.
It's enough. And love your neighbor, do no harm, like you said.
Yeah.
Right. You should about to say something.
No, I was just going to say, and even if that one is, which I know it will be more than this, but even if that one is you.
Yeah, that's the first one. Right.
You can't help others if you're not helping yourself.
No, exactly right. Exactly right. Angie
Cypher, ladies and gentlemen,
so much for joining us. And I really do hope that you are carving the way for, and we talked about this before we hit record, but pastors' wives, it's a voice that we don't hear very often on the Desert Sanctuary. So I'm confident that you are going to lead the charge, and I hope that we hear from more pastors' wives, because it is a very different perspective. There were a lot of things that I couldn't relate to in your story, but there were so many things that I could.
Yeah.
And I heard you, and it resonated with with the things that I went through as a pastor's wife. So
let's do some more of this.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you so much for being part of our day today. It was so great.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the chance to share.
Listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate your support. We appreciate the confidence you give us to keep doing this and to hear stories like this. So as always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.